Okay, can everybody hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, first of all, Barbara, thank you, Barbara, for allowing me to come today, because I have a story for you. And it's a story of my life, my family, but it's my parents. And if I were writing the story, it could be entitled either God's Plan, or Fate, or The American Dream, or What Doesn't Kill Us Makes Us Stronger. And you will see that all of these themes intertwined in the story. And Barbara asked me, she said, Joanne, how did an immigrant from Italy and a farm boy from Alabama meet and end up in Franklin County, Tennessee? And it is an amazing story. So I'm going to take you through it, and it'll be we'll do this part, Italy, then we'll go to Alabama, then we'll go to Chicago, and then we'll go to Franklin County. So it's going to be in several parts. But I'm going to start in 1905 in Pavula, Italy. This was an Italian town. Now you see the hands, that's my Italian genes. It is an Italian town in the mountains. The Serafini family, which was my grandmother's family, lived on a farm. Everything was raised on that farm, and things never change in Europe in the rural areas. My two sons and myself went to find the farm. They said, oh, your mother was born here. That's the bed she was born in. Everything was the same. So anyway, so we're in a farm in Pavula, Italy. Her father was a coal miner in the neighboring mountain. But they lived on the farm. He was very dissatisfied with the Italian government. He said it was very oppressive. He said, I'll be a coal miner today. When I die, I'll be a coal miner. And no matter how hard I work, I'll still be a coal miner. He was also very dissatisfied with the Catholic Church. He said they took the money from the peasants, and the church kept getting larger and more beautiful, while the peasants became poorer and poorer. So you've got a woman who loved her family, and this rebel, or this Italian coal miner who said there's got to be a better way. So in 1905, Domenica Bozzi was born. She later became Minnie. I love Domenica, but she thought that sounded too Italian. And so she became Domenica Bozzi. Oh, I would say when she was about 4, her coal miner dad came in and he told his wife, we're going to America. The Cherry Hill coal mine in Stanford, Illinois, which is southern Illinois, the company was looking for miners. They came to northern Italy to see if they could recruit the miners. And my grandfather said, I'm going to America. And the company promised him, if you stay 2 years, we would send for your wife and 3 children. My mother was the youngest. Your 3 children for passage. They promised him second class passage. How many of you have seen Titanic? So you know the different classes. Okay, he went to America. They sent for his family. They went through Spain because it was northern Italy and the journey. But when they got to Spain, they were put in the lower level, even though he had worked the 2 years, and they were in the lower level. It was horrible, I found out later. And I didn't know any of this until I took my mother to see the Titanic, and she said, Joanne, that was us in the bottom. That was my brother going upstairs to get us food. And that's the first time she had ever told me anything about her past. I guess it was just, the whole thing was very traumatic. But anyway, they get to Ellis Island. When when they're at Ellis Island, my grandfather had arranged for somebody to pick them up and guide them to southern Illinois. There was a mother who spoke nothing but Italian, and 3 children in Ellis Island that were put in detention or holding for 3 weeks until somebody could come and get them. And so then they make their way to Stanford, Illinois. My grandmother never stopped mourning for life back in Italy. She missed her family so much. She died maybe 4 years later. My grandfather then contracted black lung disease. He goes to Mayo Clinic, then he dies. So you have, if you see the picture, you have 3 children left as orphans. No relatives, no anything. So then they go to live with a school teacher who took those 2 girls in. The brother goes to Chicago to work. Luckily, that lady, and now we have an angel coming in, God's intervention, and sent these children to live in this family. That's where my mother learned really how to live as an American, because her mother, they never spoke anything but Italian in the home. But at that, she learned how to set a table properly. She learned how to dress as an American, and she learned quickly. Because of this family, her sister went to the University of Illinois. Now we're talking 19 in the teens, 19, maybe 15, 16, 17, those years. She went to the University of Illinois to become a teacher, and my mother went to Chicago. See, we're getting to Chicago to go to nursing school, and she became an RN. And she and some of these other nurses lived in a boarding house in Chicago. Now we're going to go to Northern Alabama. Northern Alabama, for that part of the story. My father is born 6 children. He's the 3rd, 1908. So he's 3 years older than my mother. And he lives in Northern Alabama. Do any of you know where Woodville, Alabama is? Okay, between Scottsboro and Huntsville. All right, my father was from Woodville, Alabama. And he lived, I don't think you would call him poor. They just lived like everybody else lived in those days. They lived on the side of a mountain in a house with no electricity, no running water, but everything, they ate well. And my grandfather farmed with mules, just like everybody else did. My father went to Woodville Elementary School, but there was no high school. He went to a neighboring town to go to high school, and he went to Gurley, Alabama, and he worked as a janitor's helper for room and board. But he finished high school, came home, and Barbara Clark told me this next part I'm going to tell you. His mother packed his clothes in a cardboard box with a rope around it. Now, I had not heard this story, but I called my brother about it. He went to Chicago on the train with his clothes in a cardboard box to live with his sister, who is already there and married. She was an older sister, to live until he could find a job. When he got off the train, the string of the rope broke. His clothes fell out on the ground, and he gathered them up, and he must have told Jonathan this. He said, "I will never let a kid that I know graduate and go off anywhere without a suitcase." But you think in those days, they didn't have suitcases because nobody ever went anywhere. And so anyway, my father is in Chicago. He now needs to find a job. So he had a friend who worked for New York Life as a clerk in the clearinghouse. So my father gets a job there, and he finds a place to live in a boarding house where some pretty nurses live. So in 1931, my dad is 23, my mother is 26, they marry. So that's how, Barbara, that's how they got together. But it's an amazing story how somebody from Northern Alabama They'd probably never been out of Alabama. And a lady, a continent away, an ocean away, and they meet in Chicago and they marry. All right, now we're in this time when they met, it was the roaring 20s. Then they marry, and it's early Depression years. My dad was a phenomenal, smart person. And luckily I have two brothers that inherited that. I just inherited this. But anyway, Dad was a hard worker. And he went to work with New York Life Insurance. And I remember the story that my brother says. He came in one day and he told my mother, I'm not gonna clerk anymore. And she said, but that's a salary we're going to get every month. He said, I can do better. He said, I can do better. And he did do better. And then the war came. I was a war baby. It was the last of three. The war came. After the war, he continued working. He was the top insurance salesman with New York Life in Chicago. He, at the age of 45, retired and was able to move south. But then you're going to say, but not to Franklin County. How did that happen? Well, once again, God's plan and faith. He goes back to Woodville High School to see his father. His mother has long since died, to visit his father, and he runs into Lotus Elkins. Do any of you remember? I know Mike does. Lotus Elkins had a nice sized farm in Estill Springs, Tennessee. And my father told Lotus Elkins, he said, I think I'm about ready to retire, but I want to find a farm. I'm going to bring my family to and let them know what it is to live on a farm. So Lotus said, well, you know what, Aubrey? In 2 weeks, the McKelvey property farm is the most beautiful farm you will ever see. 600 acres on the other side of Elk River from my farm is going to be up for sale. So my father goes back to Chicago, gets on the train, gets off the train in Deckard, Tennessee. Had never been to Deckard, Tennessee before. Lotus Elkins picks him up and he goes to this farm auction. And I told Richard this story. My father gets there, of course, and nobody knows this man. And he comes and he bids on this farm and he has the high bid. And they said, we don't think you can buy this farm. We don't know who you are. And Lotus Elkins says, I think, he's going to write you a check. I think you'll find out it's good. So anyway, that is how we got the farm. So he goes back to Chicago. He's not broken this to my mother, that one day she's going to live on a farm. And by this time we were in the suburbs. We had a great life in the suburbs. And but my dad kept saying, Joanne, I was his secret weapon. You're gonna love it on a farm. You're gonna have a horse, and you're gonna do this and that. So he talked my mother, okay, we will do it, but if it doesn't work out, will you promise me we'll go back? And he said, of course. But he was smart enough to know, I can't do that to my family. I can't put them on Estill Springs. At that time, Mike will tell you, Estill Springs was like in another world from Winchester. It was very separate, it was rural. And he said, I'm going to buy a house. And he bought us a house behind the high school. And I just thought that was the neatest place. It was a neighborhood, a subdivision with nothing but boys. And I came in my Chicago White Sox jacket. And they said, she has the best baseball collection ever. But this isn't about me, this is about them. My father was so smart, and this is the part of the story that I really want you to know. My dad died suddenly in 1980. He was only 72 years old. He only lived in Franklin County for 26 years. And I don't want you to think there's a fine line between bragging, but another fine line between telling you the truth and weaving in the American dream. My father, in those 26 years, well, the first thing he did, and I want you to know this because you're a part of this, he said, we need to find a church. We don't know anybody, we need to find a church. And he found this little church on the corner that had Sunday school rooms at the bottom, sanctuary on the top, full of the nicest people you would ever know. It was the Cumberland Presbyterian Church. And it's not changed in all those years. But I think of the sweet souls, and I started to think I should name them, but I knew I couldn't name them all. But they welcomed us, and probably Pat Cunningham, you're probably one of the few, your Jim would remember us when we first came to the Cumberland Presbyterian Church. But my father helped build, the first thing that was built was the Sunday school room, and then he helped with the building of the sanctuary. But, and I when I was going through this, I thought, I'm just gonna call him Aubrey the Builder instead of Bob the Builder, because he also helped build the new hospital. Do any of you remember the old Smith Memorial Hospital? Okay, when we moved here, that was the only hospital. He was put on the hospital board and he helped build that new hospital. And then Richard's the next part of the story. He built the new hospital, but he said, we don't have any doctors. So he and Dave Nishke started the doctor recruitment program. And see if you remember these doctors, they all came in at one time through my father, David Nishke. Dr. Bagby, Dr. Kennedy, Dr. Eccles, Dr. Petrachko, Dr. Cleveland. Did I leave any others out, Richard? Oh, and Dr. Hubbard, how could I forget him? How could we forget Dr. Hubbard? Okay, all of these doctors came in at the same time. So not only did he help build the hospital, he helped furnish the hospital with patients and with doctors. Then I was looking at these newspaper articles. He also helped build the library. And I was showing it to Richard. I thought it was so funny. Their fundraising drive was, the top amount they needed was $28,000. Can you imagine that? $28,000 now. But the old the old library used to be in the building across from the movie theater where the Masons have that. That used to be our old library. But in those 26 years, he also built subdivisions, and there were so many things he did. And I keep thinking, this is the American dream. This is what you give back. Now, he died, and I guess that was the darkest day of my life. And that picture that you see with him holding, that's Andy Davis. That was 2 months before he died. And that's the last picture I have of my father. Now I want to tell you more about my mother, because she is such an integral part of this story. Losing her mother, being an orphan, that is the part of the story that what doesn't kill us makes it stronger. And it's one of those things with a coping skill. She never would talk about it. It's like it never happened. She never told me she was from Italy. And when I found out, and I found out after the Titanic episode, after I found out that she was an immigrant from Italy, I said, Mother, why did you not tell us? She said, Joanne, there was so much stigma against Italians in those early days. They associated with the mafia and killers. And she said, we were from northern Italy. We were more like the French or the Germans. She said, we weren't those people, but that when they found out you were Italian, they would kind of go, oh, do you have any relatives in the mafia? But anyway, that's what she feared. And she thought that it would be a stigma on us and her husband if people knew that she was Italian and an immigrant. But I want you to see her birth certificate up there. It's in Italian, and her citizenship papers and their marriage license. But until we went to Italy and we told her how beautiful her home was, she said, I wasn't poor. And we said, no, Mother, you came from a beautiful place of Italy. Be proud of your heritage. So in the last few years, she opened up just a little. And she claimed that she never knew any Italian. But the caregivers that stayed with her had a baby monitor on her. And the night before she died, she was in her bed talking to her mother in Italian and singing an Italian song. So all of this time, what you suppress and what you remember. But I was going to tell you about my mother's late years. When she was in her 70s, she was diagnosed, thanks to Richard Bagby. Not that she was diagnosed, but he was the one that found that there was something not right with her. Her blood count was low, and said, you need to go and get more tests done. And she had stomach cancer. Dr. Eccles told me, Joanne, you're lucky if your mother has a year to live. So he did surgery on her. And I sat with Jonathan Clark and I said, Jonathan, it's taking so long. And he said, Joanne, that's a good sign. When it's quick, it means they sew you up and you're gone. But after this surgery, I went to my mother and I said, oh, Mother, I'm so happy. She said, I am too, no cancer. I said, what? And I kind of was taken back, but I didn't question her. She said, no, they thought they'd find cancer, but it was benign. I don't have cancer. And that's exactly how she went through life. Things that were so bad, you just erased them. And I said, Dr. Eccles, I can't get her to go back for a checkup. He said, Joanne, she's handling it the best way she can handle it. She died 20 years later of congestive heart failure at 99 and a half. All right, then there's another about how tough she was. When she was in her 80s, she fell out of a golf cart and broke her hip. Also, when she was in her 80s, she was hit with a bowling ball in her shoulder and broke her shoulder. All of this time, she is healing and she's never complaining. But that's their story. And I want to tell you that when you go back and you look about, this is the American dream. This is what it's all about. And this is what my children even don't understand. They know the story, but I don't think they know the significance of the Roaring '20s, the Depression, World War II. Dad was on a boat he enlisted at 35, and he was in the Philippines. You come back from the war, you continue your life. But at 45, and he could have stayed in Chicago, no telling where he would have gone. But he said, I have a dream. And this is another part of the story. Follow that dream. Listen to your heart wherever it leads you. It may be a new direction, but you need to follow that dream. And so that's how, Barbara, we got to Franklin County, Tennessee, and it was a chance meeting with Lotus Elkins in Alabama. So that's my story. That's my parents' story.